evening and welcome to episode 194 of the HHH Racing Podcast. I'm your proud host, Howard Kravitz. Thank you very much for joining me on a special night tonight as we're going to be talking in detail about everything you want to know about morning lines. It's going to be a fascinating conversation with one of the best in the business, Nick Tammaro. Before we bring on Nick, make sure you subscribe on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Our subscriptions are way up. We greatly appreciate it. Also, smash that like button after you do that, which will tell YouTube that this is a great podcast to watch. Also, hit that notification bell. That'll tell you when new content will come up on the podcast and on the YouTube channel. And we have a lot of content up on there. I did a podcast with Jim Miller of Hawthorne. There's a carryover this Friday at Hawthorne. Check that out, episode 193. And then tomorrow night, we have to change the time. Late breaking news due to some work and family obligations. Tomorrow night's podcast, and I'll be tweeting this out also. This will be Thursday night. Is going to start at 9:30 Eastern. It'll be a little bit of a shorter podcast due to the later time slot, but it'll be with Jessica Paquette, who is a fantastic handicapper, jack of all trades. She's awesome. She'll be with us again. We are just adjusting the start time tomorrow night, Thursday night here on the podcast. It'll be a 9:30 Eastern time start. Of course, you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Anchor. You can also follow me, as you see on my name tag, at HKravitz on Twitter. And also on the scroll below, you can reach me through email, hkravitzhorse@gmail.com. The Power Picks have been red hot. The Power Picks, everyone, which is the tip sheet we give out every Saturday, and it's only $4 a Saturday, which means if you subscribe now, there's information below the video player, and also you can see on the screen through Patreon. If you subscribe now, you're getting the full 2 blowout editions of the Breeders' Cup picks and everything you need to know about the Breeders' Cup for $4. That's it. Because we charge $4 a Saturday. I am not raising the price for the Breeders' Cup editions. I've seen people put out there, buy picks for $30, $50, $100. No. $4. That's all it will take. If you subscribe to the Power Picks, you'll get every Saturday those Power Picks, and it will include 2 editions for the Breeders' Cup. It is the best deal in town. The ROI is up to $2.49 after we crushed it last week at San Anita and Keeneland. So please check out those Power Picks. You can find out more information also on our website, hhhracingpodcast.com. All right, I think that takes care of all the particulars. Paul Halloran, one of our co-hosts, was going to come on this evening, but he's actually at the Basketball Hall of Fame in Springfield, Massachusetts. No, he's not being elected to the Basketball Hall of Fame, but he's a basketball referee at the college level. They have a meeting there. So, again, work calls sometimes. He will not be with us. I'll be pulling a solo job tonight with our guest. Let's bring our guest on right now. I mean, what has this guy not done in the horse racing industry? Normally, I'd say he is currently, the race caller at Sam Houston, which of course he is. But at this very moment, amongst many other things within the money media, he is the morning line maker for Keeneland. And I have to double check, I believe he's also going to be doing the morning lines for the Breeders' Cup. So please, when we bring on Nick, any questions you have in the live chat, top right-hand side of the screen, questions for Nick Tammaro. This is a great night to do it. Let's bring him on. He's in Dallas. He's a busy guy, but he's coming on tonight just for us. The one and only Nick Tammaro. Nick, how's Dallas? How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Howard, and I just want you to know the next time you think I don't love you, remember that tonight's game 1 of the Astros-Yankees series. So if you see me peek to the left every once in a while, don't wonder too much, but I promise I'll stay away.
I guess that'll lead to the next question. How much money do you have? Is it close to Mattress Mac? I think he's got $10 million. I know you got some new gigs going on. You got some money in the coffers. I'm sure the wife and family wouldn't mind if you put a few bucks on the Astros. I'm guessing it's not $10 million.
Not quite. Boy, Mac is set up for $75 million if the Astros win the World Series. He's a gambling man.
Well, I know you're a diehard Astro fan. I'm a big sports fan. We do really appreciate it. If you peek a little bit and you don't quite, listen to the question, it's all good. I'm a teacher. I teach high school teenagers, Nick, for 26 years. You think they always pay attention to me? Are you kidding? They're on their phone. They're, talking about boyfriends, girlfriends, what they're doing over the weekend. They could care less sometimes about, exponents and, the Pythagorean theorem and whatnot. So I'm used to it, Nick, is what I'm trying to tell you.
There, there's nothing quite like talking to somebody when you know they're not paying attention at all.
Oh.
My mother did this to me the other day. We were on the phone, and of course, my mother's very dear to me. And I said, "Mom, are you in the middle of something?" And she said, "How do you know?" I said, "Because I know you're not paying attention." So it's always funny when you not only have it happen, but can call them out a little bit too.
Yeah, well, tomorrow I get my slight revenge for any students that have been acting up, Nick. Tomorrow and Friday, parent-teacher conferences. That's right.
Uh-oh.
So now that they think their children. Listen, I've got a lot of great students, and overall, I obviously enjoy my job. But I got a few knuckleheads, and if those parents are coming, listen, you gotta keep it straight. You gotta tell it like it is. You can't BS with them. You gotta. It's their education, So it is
What
what
kind
it
of
is.
math do you teach?
I teach high school level this year. I am teaching college algebra honors, which is basically pre-calculus honors for most schools, and also a senior level class with sort of average to lower level students to try to prepare them for college entrance exams. So we call it applied math. So sort of a lower level math class for seniors, and then pre-calc honors. So
Very nice.
I get the wide variety. Not a big fan of teaching the freshmen all the time. I like to teach the upper level classes. Anyway, Nick, let's jump right in. I've got a list of questions. We're going to go on, ladies and gentlemen, for about half an hour, 40 minutes, maybe 45. When Nick, whenever you got to go, we'll get you out of here, and the Astros will be up 8-0 by the time we're done.
Move your mouth to God's ears.
You won't miss out. I sent you a few things we're going to talk about, and I've got about 6 quick topics. But before we do that, I got a surprise for you. And I'm like, you know what? This is quite the fraternity and possibly sorority. I don't know if there's some women that do morning lines out there, for tracks. But I figured, we got to bring on another morning line maker and chop it up with you. So Nick's like, who's this going to be? Let's bring on right now the morning line maker at Hawthorne Racecourse, Mr. Jim Miller. Jim, how you doing tonight?
Gentlemen, I'm doing good. Nick, to your credit, just in my lower corner here is the game as well. So I'm following them also too.
I appreciate it. And, you and I have not actually met, but I'm glad to do so virtually.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. And Howard and I were talking about a little bit earlier in the day, Nick, how everybody kind of becomes Twitter friendly throughout the course of the industry, just knowing one another and knowing what they do as a line maker and knowing what they do just throughout the industry with race callers, with analysts and everything like that. You wear a lot of different hats. I wear a lot of different hats as well. And Howard had asked me if I had any questions for you as a line maker, because I'm always trying to learn. And the lines that I have the hardest time making, Nick, are 2-year-old horses that are debuting. And a lot of it's because I'm not super strong on pedigree. And I clocked horses for many years. So I was one that put a lot of focus into workouts and that. But for you, when you're making a line, for example, just take a Keeneland race, for example, in the spring where you're seeing 2-year-olds for the first time. I mean, how often is it, okay, well, it's Wesley Ward, so that's automatic. It's a certain price. And how often is it that you have to either dig into pedigree, or are you saying, hey, I'm going to go connections, I'm going to go workouts? What do you do to put together a line, especially on a 2-year-old race with a lot of unraced horses or lightly raced horses?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think one that's filled with guesswork. So I treat the 2-year-old races, and I've fortunately at this point have not had to make them for the 2-year-old, the debuting 2-year-olds in the spring. So we'll see if I do a decent enough job if Keeneland brings me back in 2023, and I'll have to do that. But for the fall, what I've tried to do is approach it like I do my handicapping. So when I go through the card the first time, I write down on the left side of my past performances, I write down the percentages of the sire first time out with 2-year-olds. And then on the right side of the form, I draw a line, and on top of it, I put the dams record, and on the bottom, I put the siblings record. So it looks a little bit like this. This is for Saturday at Keeneland. And, some of it'll look like hieroglyphics, of course, as RPPs often do. But that'll at least help me get a little bit more info on, somewhat who they are. So, for example, there's a horse running on Friday at Keeneland who's out of Catch the Moon, who happens to have produced 4 very, very talented horses, including Midnight Bourbon. And so seeing those names in the pedigree page, I was like, okay, well, this horse obviously went for $1.6 million for a reason. So that was one that I wanted to move down pretty significantly price-wise. So I'll do that as far as pedigree goes. And then, the more clues you can get this time of year from them running prior, you really have to take those. So for example, Cyclone Mischief, who won today at Churchill, was actually outfinished by another horse who was running today. But I made Cyclone Mischief a shorter price, not only because it looked like he had a pace advantage today, but he went off 3-1 in his debut. So to me, if a horse went off 3-1 in their debut at Churchill Downs with 11 or 12 horses in there, word must have been out that they were training well. And Dale Romans is one who's been known to let it be known when he's got a horse with a little bit of talent. So, I mean, long answer to your question is I try to aggregate as much info as possible. I've noticed that the public bets bullet workouts heavily. Yep. So, you've clocked. I've watched a lot of workouts. I know that a bullet is not always a bullet in the sense that it's somewhat impressive. And you might know that a horse had a bullet workout yet was under a drive the entire way. So I think that's one where I've tried to give it a little bit more credence than I thought I would off the bat. I know David Aragona watches a lot of workouts for Saratoga and uses a lot of that info, which, I mean, he's obviously very, very good at it and incorporates some of that into his line. So, I guess it's a matter of finding out which part of the guesswork you can do and still feel somewhat confident you've got enough info.
Okay. And then my other question, I know Howard has a ton of questions, but I had one other that I wanted to ask you because in 25 years of doing the job, I get asked quite a bit of times, don't be discouraged by looking to the side there because I'm equally discouraged with you. Unless you're a Yankees fan, then you're just fine. But looking at being a morning line odds maker and being a public handicapper, I get the question asked all the time, well, how can you lay this horse as a favorite, but pick this horse? And I try to explain to everybody, well, when I'm laying the morning line, that's how I feel that the wagering public is going to wager on the race. But when I handicap the race, I handicap it based on how I feel the outcome of the race is. But the one thing that I found that I've had to do over the course of time is, okay, I'll make the line and I'll put that aside. And then I'll print out a whole nother set of past performances that don't have the line on it because I don't want to be influenced by my line to do my handicapping. Is that something that you do, or is that something that you see other people doing? And do you find that helpful in your handicapping?
Yeah, I think totally. I think treating it as two exercises is essential. You can't, if you're handicapping as part of the morning line process, as if you're going to bet, your line's going to be skewed. Right. And then you're going to run into the nightmare scenario of making a horse 10-1 because you might be interested in betting it. And when it gallops at 4-1, everybody thinks you're playing some kind of game when it's really not, it really doesn't go that way. But yeah, I think it has to be treated as two exercises. The good thing is that, depending on your time frame, most of the morning lines are due the morning after the draw. Sure. So if you can just do that and get it out of the way and then handicap a little bit closer to actual race day, you can generally avoid that. But yeah, and I think actually printing out two sets of PPs is really, really smart. I actually did that for a couple of cards at Keeneland and used paper for one and then my iPad for the other one. And it separated the two activities. It actually made it a lot easier. And there were a couple of times where I noticed that there were horses who I probably didn't treat properly on the morning line.
Right. Oh, awesome. Howard, thank you, man. Thank you for letting me jump in.
Before you leave, Jim, Nick, I just want to confirm that you are going to be doing the morning line for the Breeders' Cup. Is that correct?
Yes.
For sure. Okay, awesome. Great. So, Jim, last question. Let's help out our friend Nick Tammaro, even though he doesn't need it, of course. Flight line, morning line. Jim Miller, what do you got?
Right now, you're looking at the way everybody in the industry loves it. The horse, you got to say probably 6-5, 7-5, don't you think?
Ooh, I think Nick might go lower than that. I mean, well, we're going to talk about that, Jim. And Nick, don't give me your answer.
Here's the only reason I say why. And it's the best horse in the country. I think everybody thinks it's the best horse in the country. The one thing that I always find incredible every single year is the massive love for 3-year-olds in the Breeders' Cup Classic. And this has been one 3-year-old crop that a lot of horses have stuck around and continued to race really well. And that was the one concern why I think a lot of these 3-year-old horses might take a lot of money, at least in the Classic.
Well, Jim, I'm gonna let you keep you in suspense because I'm gonna take you off and you'll watch it. We'll find out Nick's answer on Flightline a little bit later. Jim Miller, really appreciate you hopping on. Anything else, Nick, for Jim?
No, thanks so much, Jim. I'm a big fan. It's great to meet you.
Nice meeting you, Nick. Good luck, guys.
Thanks, Jim. Take care. Bye-bye. All right. I promise I got no other surprises for you. Other than, what is it, 1-0 Yankees? Sorry about that.
Yeah, Harrison Bader hit a home run, but
all right. It's early. No worries. All right, Nick. Let's. There's two main things I want to talk about. I think there's a big misunderstanding by a lot of the public, even the smart handicappers and people that are in the know. The two main things I wanted to talk about are the mechanics tonight. Are the mechanics of the morning line. And as you know, I'm a math teacher, and I whipped up a real quick spreadsheet that I think is easy for people to understand. I'm sure you have method. And the other one, I have some specific questions on certain horses and some other things with morning lines. So for people that don't know you because they've been, I guess, under a rock, very briefly tell everyone where you've done morning lines and your experience with morning lines, first of all.
So I started making the morning line at Sam Houston about 5 years ago. And so there, I made it a couple of times at Louisiana Downs when I was there for calling the races this past year, back in July when John McGarry needed a couple of days off, and now Keeneland. So that's been the extent of it. I've always kind of been interested in odds making and things like that, and I think my interest in it became even more significant when I met Roxy a couple of years ago, the famed Michael Roxborough of the Las Vegas Sports Consultants. And so I asked him a lot of questions over time, and the difference between 100-point lines and lines with a little bit of juice in them, and bookmaking and all the questions like that. I would definitely not consider myself a bookmaker by any means, but I always enjoyed the exercise of it. I thought it was, if you were sharp, then you could set the right line, right? And it was kind of a test of that. So yeah, that's how I've done it. And this year was actually my first year doing the morning line for the quarter horses, also at Sam Houston, which you can imagine was awfully difficult, awfully fun.
Very difficult. And I heard you talking with, I think it was JK and maybe also with Steve Vick recently, about morning lines. And this, people have this like crazy fascination / hatred with, bad morning lines. I watch a lot of news, and, no matter what like cable news channel you watch, of course, there's the scroll on the bottom of the screen. And I'm expecting to see, based on what people are saying about morning lines, not necessarily yours, but in general, fighting in Ukraine, gas prices up, Nick Tammaro's morning lines at Keeneland, not great, or whatever. I mean, some people think like, what is the big deal? And some people get really worked over by it. What is the fascination with? Do you think people feel like they're being tricked or deceived, or I mean, what is it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. Honestly, what I think is a big part of it is I think it's twofold. I think there's a big segment of people out there who play in online handicapping contests, and when they get a little bit short on preparation, they rely on the morning line to guide what they're going to pick. And I think that is, I mean, I don't blame them for it. I can't say I've ever done it, so I can't relate to that part of it. But I think that's number one. I think more so the issue is that the same thing happens in putting in multi-race bets. And so if you've gone, if you're a little short on time, or, for example, I will admit that in the past, when I've looked at a sequence, maybe at a place where I wasn't as familiar with it, I'll look at the morning line to get a sense of what the line maker thinks are going to happen odds wise. And it's just a backwards process. It's not what I would do handicapping a track that I play regularly. So I try to stay away from it, as much as possible. But I guess that's part of it. I don't know. I've asked people on Twitter that have had comments about the morning line. I asked two guys on Sunday what they would have made a horse that they scoffed at me for making too big a price, and they didn't reply. So I'm assuming they watch this podcast because everybody in the industry with a brain does, and so they'll answer. I'd love to know what it would have been, and I wasn't, I wasn't being a jerk. I wasn't being sarcastic. I mean, I think my persona on Twitter is pretty much like I am normally, maybe even a little nicer. But I was wondering because I could learn. I could certainly get some insight into it, and so. I guess that's it. So I guess it's a little bit of those two things, more so some of the multi-race betting. I've gotten to a point, and I mean, 90% of my betting, 80% of my betting is NYRA, and David Aragona's morning line is among the most accurate in the country. So I know that if I really like a horse that David made 6-1, and I'm not assuming there's going to be a boatload of scratches, and I'm going to get, somewhere in that neighborhood. And I think people like that reliability. But I think there's also an understanding that has to come into it that Keeneland's tough. The fields are very, very large, and they're very competitive. So, if I make a horse 4-1 and you end up getting 3, sorry.
Without putting you on the spot, have you enjoyed it so far?
I have, yeah. I'm sort of a masochist, right? So,
well, I'll tell you where morning lines make a big difference. We have a new sponsor on the show, Stable Duel, and Bree Mott. They do a great job, a fun fantasy game. If you're familiar with Stable Duel, Nick, obviously the morning lines are huge because it's fantasy, and you have to, it costs you a certain amount per morning line. So Certainly for Stable Duel fans,
Sure.
your morning lines are very important. Trish Smith, one of our great viewers, is on the show here. Trish, thanks for joining us. She said she's glad to finally get the right time to be on the show. Much respect to the morning line makers. Definitely a difficult, thankless job. No doubt about that. All right, Nick, let's do this. I want to get into the mechanics of the morning line. We can literally spend 5 minutes on it. And I'm going to bring up a spreadsheet. And before I do that, do you I'm assuming all morning line makers, and I'm sorry for not knowing the answer. There's obviously a spreadsheet or something you guys use to create your morning line to make sure the math is right. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, I use a Google Doc that
Okay.
I created. Actually, that was created by Travis Stone when he was making the morning line at Saratoga about
Okay.
5 or 6 years ago. And I was, I wouldn't say I was helping him. There were days where he would have me kind of look at some races because he knew I was following the circuit pretty closely. So I continue to use that Google Doc, which I can put on my iPad and hold up for everybody also. Because I'm not new.
Yeah, I wish we could share. We're not Zoom, so we can't share screens. But you don't have to do that. It's okay. I'm going to go ahead and share something that this is just very raw. I literally, as a math teacher, I'm capable of doing something like this in literally 5 minutes. But I think it's going to get the point across here. So let me just bring this up on screen. It's very simplistic, but I think it's going to help a lot of people out there. Let me take the banner down here. Also, while I'm getting this ready, Nick. And you already explained a little bit with Jim Miller.
Yeah.
Just reiterate to everyone out there. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Reiterate to everyone out there what the morning line actually is, because it's not your personal handicapping opinion on what the odds should be.
Yeah, definitely not. It's an approximation of what the public is going to do, how the public is going to better race, and what Howard has laid out here is exactly how my spreadsheet looks.
Okay.
Except my totals at the top instead of the bottom. But obviously the odds that you're putting in the odds column are going to be, you're going to do 100 divided by that plus 1. So for example, the 3-1 is going to be 25 points. The 4.5 is going to be 18.18, and so on and so forth. And so you're looking to add these numbers up. And ideally, you're looking for a number between 120 and at most 130. You'll see some people make comments online, and I mean, everybody who I've seen make these comments, I think, is pretty astute and gets it, about 135-point lines or 138-point lines or things like that. The higher you make those numbers, the less accurate your line is going to be, because you're building so much into the line that's going to take you away from wanting to be around 120. What you're supposed to be at is 100 plus takeout. So, you're, and then with a couple of points extra. So that's why I really try to hold to 125. I think anything beyond that sort of can get a little dicey. And I think you run the risk of being a little bit inaccurate. What you'll notice, and anybody out there who's a little math inclined will see, is that the difference between making a horse 3-1 and 4-1 in terms of points is pretty significant. So you're talking about 5 points, right? And so when you're adjusting those numbers as you're trying to get things more accurate, obviously the lower the horse's odds are that you're starting with, the more it does for your line when you adjust them upwards or downwards. So if you have a 3-5 shot, you start at 0.6, for example, you're gonna be dedicating a ton of points to that horse's particular number. So there's a 3-2 shot, which is going to be 40 points, but you adjust that horse to 9-5 and make it 1.8. You're going to see that instead of 40 points, at this point, you're dealing with 35.71. Obviously, that's better. So when you're trying to get a line, it's very infrequently that I'm trying to get a line up to 120. I'm much more at a place like Keeneland trying to get it down from the 130s, as you can imagine. So smaller fields obviously are a little easier, but yeah, in terms of mechanics, this is a great layout. And it starts with going through the races, looking at the things that are necessary to build into the line, and then getting in there and putting in some numbers and trying to work out the right odds combinations.
So again, I want to make this very simple. Not everyone's math inclined. And Nick, I got something I haven't really mentioned it on air. I'm going to just put us on screen. I haven't mentioned this on air. This week actually, I am proposing to our math department at our high school, and this is becoming more popular throughout high schools, a sports statistic class, which will involve, it's not going to involve how to gamble, obviously, but it will involve odds and horse racing, because obviously with the influx of legalized gambling, we got to talk about it.
Yeah.
So sports analytics is huge out there. I'm very excited. Hopefully our school's going to allow it to happen. We're going to cover the gambit of many sports, but I thought that'll be pretty cool. Maybe we'll have you guest lecture my class remotely next year sometime. But anyway, let's go back to this, because again, not everyone's mathematically inclined. So once again, if you see a 4-to-1 odds, it's very simple, everyone. You add 1 to the odds, and then it's 100 divided by that. So it's 100 divided by the odds plus 1. Again, 100 divided by the odds plus 1 is the percent chance, in theory, that the horse has to win the race. So again, if you take a 4-to-1, I feel like I'm in math class again. You take that 4-to-1, it's 100 divided by the quantity. That means you got to add 4 plus 1, which is 5. That's where you get your 20. And then you go the other way around, of course. If you say a horse has a 20% chance to win, you do 100 divided by 20 minus 1. So again, when you want to go to percents, it's a plus. There's my alliteration, Nick. Percents plus, the opposite is minus in terms of which way you go. So there's a little bit of way for people to know. I always, for fun, Nick, like if I'm alive to a pick 5, because I'm a goofball mathematical knucklehead, I'm like, oh, I should have an X% chance to win because I got all these horses covered. And then, of course, the 6.2% chance of winning comes in, and I lose. But anyway, is there anything else people need to know, do you think, about the mathematics of it, Nick, that you see on the screen? Anything else you want to say?
No, I think as far as the math goes, that makes perfect sense. That's good news for the Astros. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead. You can give up. You can give updates.
Well,
it's all good.
They tied the game, and their worst hitter in the lineup got the hit, so we'll take it. But
right.
No, I think that's it as far as the math goes. I think it's important to, I mean, look, I think, and I mean this as charitably as possible, I think there are people out there that make comments about this that literally have no idea how to do it. No. So, I mean, I think this goes a long way towards explaining it. And you have to understand also that we generally do it in a, pretty conventional way, only even numbers, obviously down to 3, and I use 5. I try not to make 2 horses the same price. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule on that. Yeah. I mean under 6 to 1. I mean, I'll make multiple horses 8 to 1 or something like that. So, there's also an element to that too.
So we have a lot of questions coming on the chat. Please go ahead and keep saying those questions, folks. This is a fascinating conversation. I want to also thank Paul Halloran, my co-host, who thought of this idea and thought of bringing you on. I think he spoke to you about this. So thanks to
one of
Paul
racing's
Halloran,
heroes.
Unfortunately, can't be with us tonight. Do you tend to condense the odds? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm a big Paul fan.
Oh, Paul's a great guy.
Yeah, he's the greatest. Yeah.
Do you tend to condense the odds, Nick, or spread them out? Like, so for example, you talked about if you're a little above or below, would you like take 20 to 1s and make them 15 to 1s and make the 2 to 1s 5 to 2s? Or you're more likely to make those 2 to 1s like 9 to 5s and the 20s like 25? You follow what I'm saying? Like, a further spread, or do you like to condense more often, would you say?
I find myself getting into scenarios where I have to move them up in odds more often than I have to move them down. So, and I think that generally has to do with being around the 130 number and trying to get under that and really down towards 125. So I find myself doing a lot of, 12s to 15s, 15s to 20s, things like that. It really all hinges on how well you capture the favorite. If you get the favorite and you've got a really solid favorite at 8 to 5 or so, then, everybody else will filter in pretty nicely. And obviously the difficulty there is the field size. If you're talking about a 12 horse field and you're trying to limit the number of 50 to 1s you're putting out there, then, Strobe won last week at, I think, 2 to 5. I made him 9 to 5. I didn't feel great about making him 9 to 5, but I'm not going to explain to Keeneland management why I put 5 50 to 1s on the board, because the thing is, you and I both know a lot of those horses are going to go off better than 50 to 1.
Yeah.
Right. So I can't do that. And that's one of the things I think that is a little bit lost in the exercise. But yeah, to answer your question, I find myself moving them up in odds more often than moving them down.
I heard you talking about that with Steve Beck. Quick question from David Piscopo. David, thanks for joining the show. What do you do with long layoffs, Nick?
Yeah, always a challenge. I think that's where Formulator's your friend, using the short stats at the bottom of the PPs, but also using Formulator. Obviously, there are certain trainers that are particularly good off long layoffs. The two guys that come to mind that we run into most on the eastern side of the country are Todd Pletcher and Chad Brown. Todd Pletcher's excellent on both surfaces, specifically on dirt, and specifically dirt long. And Chad is great on the turf with horses off of long layoffs. So, I mean, I think from a general handicapping perspective, I have always found myself a little bit prejudiced against horses off long layoffs, but from a morning line perspective, I mean, here's a great example was Prevalence today, who I made a 2-1 favorite. Now, obviously, if Hollis and Doc Amster weren't in the race when I was making the morning line, I would have probably made him more like even money, and he'll finish any second now. So, he was coming off a nearly 6-month layoff and really put forth a pretty underwhelming performance. So he was a horse that I sort of eschewed the issue with the long layoff and focused on the fact that class-wise, he was just a real standout.
Yeah, and Chatelaw was coming off a long. That would have been, if that race had held together, that would have been a real nice race. It's a shame those two horses scratched. You got a long shot. Well, 5-1 because of the scratches, but the 5 horse ended up winning that race. How do I know? Because I'm a serial horizontal player, Nick, and I played the pick 5. So I didn't have James Graham in the last race, unfortunately, but that's the way it goes.
What did the winner of that race pay? The ace?
He went off at 5-1.
Oh, okay, because he was like 10 or 12 to 1.
He took a lot of late. Shockingly, took a lot of. Don't get me started. Took a lot of late money, Nick.
Different
but Raylu gave him a great ride there.
Yeah.
All right, we got about 15 minutes left of Nick Tammaro. Nick, I got a few other questions I want to make sure we get to, so we'll go a little bit more quickly. My next question: how do you evaluate your own performance as a morning line maker? Is it as simple as how close the morning lines are to the post time odds?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, I'm going to dig in more after the meet to overall accuracy and creating, I think it's a Q score or a T score, depending on how you evaluate it. So I know there are a couple of people on social media I've seen that do that, and I'm going to ask for their assistance with it. I think on a day-to-day basis, I just kind of keep track of how frequently I get the favorite right. And I think that there's a little bit of benefit to that, but I don't think it's the easiest thing to evaluate day to day or even week to week. I know that last week I was not pleased with some horses on Wednesday, and the last 4 on Sunday, I didn't think I was particularly accurate on those. But I did think that Tuesday through Saturday went well. And I think for the most part, the stakes have been good. There was a Chris Block horse on opening day that I made way too big a price. Now, I will admit.
Have you read my notes down here? Yeah, we'll get to him. We'll get to him, my friend.
I'll tell you what's funny about it, Howard, was I was on a cruise. So I had arranged a cruise with the family. Yeah. And I was barely on Twitter at all. And so I didn't get on Twitter until Friday. And I saw people making comments about it. And, I was like, 4-letter.
What? Being with the family. No. I'm not saying this to kiss your ass at all, but I think you're doing a great job. It's very hard. These boutique meets are especially difficult. You got horses coming from all over the country, different tracks. It's just, I've never done like a full card, let alone one or a few races of morning lines. It's very difficult, everyone. So take it easy on Nick Tammaro out there. Let's see. Next question. Actually, here's a question from Matthew Chimura. Do certain jockeys affect the way you make the morning lines?
I will admit, and I learned the hard way after last Wednesday, that nobody moves the market like Irad Ortiz.
Oh,
so he really, I think you can. Yeah, it's a great question. I think you can click all of his horses down. Maybe a click, maybe a little bit more. And it's just because he wins a lot and his horses are very well supported. I think that trainers are more influential than jockeys, but I do think that the public's also going to notice when, a horse has been ridden by John Court 3 straight times and Joel Rosario gets on, or, I think the Chris Block horse we were referencing before going to Flavian Pratt probably mattered quite a bit to the wagering public. So I think it's something that you have to keep in mind.
I mean, if Mitchell Murrow is coming, who by the way is a very solid jockey, but comes in to ride, knock your socks off, he's not going off at 6-1. I can tell you that. No. That was one of my questions. You already touched on it. We don't need. I was just going to give you a little crap for fun. Knocks your socks off. For people who don't know, was the block horse in the Jessamine was 30-1 morning life. Went off at 6-1. Everyone I talked to, Nick, the day or two before, just some smart people that I happened to listen to, like this horse. There's no way this horse is going to be 30-1. But again, the circumstances caused that issue. Do you have any other specific regrets in this meet so far, or things you want to continue to improve on as the meet comes to an end here?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm always trying to improve. So I'm trying to increase the number of things I'm looking at. One thing I've tried to be really steadfast with is taking my time. And I think I found the right recipe for that is that I kind of go in two waves now and do my initial run through as quickly after the draw as possible, and then go back through and go race by race at a different time. So for example, for Friday's card, I did all of the work on Monday, and then I didn't actually go back through and make the line until last night. So and I think it helped. I think it made me a little fresher in looking at it. And like with anything else, I mean, I don't, a lot of us that are into racing do puzzles and stuff like that, and crossword puzzles. And sometimes even with the Wordle, like I'll stop and come back in 5 minutes, and it's like I see something I hadn't seen before. So I've tried to do that, but I've kept kind of a notebook of things that I think are factors that I probably was underestimating. So, a workout over the track, especially a fast workout over the track, certain trainers who are taking more money than others. And I'm kind of noticing some trainers who are taking less money than others. And there are some guys that I've been probably putting a little too low on the line. And, the public bases a lot on the percentages. And if they see a 5 or 6% trainer, even if that horse is taking a precipitous drop in class, they're just going to ignore them.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects that go into the game for sure, and people have to pay attention. By the way, on the right side of my screen, I got the Raven Run up for Saturday, which is a 9-horse field. I don't know if we're gonna have time to get into it, but I'm assuming the morning line, they're not out on Equibase or the PPs, but are the morning lines out for Saturday, or do you have the morning lines already for Saturday?
No, I'm going to make them tonight, and I'll turn them
cool.
in the morning. Yeah.
Okay, so we're not going to go through it, but that spreadsheet that I had 9 horses up there, and at some other time, Nick, maybe we'll go through a race and actually go through how you're going to put the morning lines together. We won't do that tonight. I have 2 other quick questions for you, Nick, and we'll let you go back to the Astros, and really appreciate your time tonight. This is a bit of a delicate question, so I'm going to ask it carefully. Maybe not your own personal experience, but have you heard through the grapevine any track executives or any friends that you have that do morning lines have been sort of forced to skew the line and make them the odds a little bit bigger, so as to not people think that it's a very obvious race? Like, for example, a horse really should be 4 to 5 morning line, but someone has been told to make the horse 9 to 5 to make the race more competitive, to raise handle. Because I've heard whispers of things like that happening in the past. Not with you, not at Keeneland, but just in general. Do you think track executives unfortunately get involved in that to a detriment?
Yes, they get involved.
Okay. And again, I don't want to get you in trouble.
Part one of the question, yes, they get involved. It's a fine line, right, Howard? I mean, we're smart guys. Yeah. Nobody wants the public.
You are. I don't know about me, but
no, you are too. But teaching is one of the hardest jobs in the world. I taught journalism for a year, but track executives don't want people picking up a racing form that's loaded with 6-horse fields with 3 to 5 favorites.
Absolutely
right?
Not.
But at the same time, and I got, and I'm very solid with my job at Sam Houston, so I'll be more candid about it in that respect. So when I made Latruska 4 to 5 in the Houston Ladies Classic last year, I sensed that my boss was kind of elbowing me to make her a bigger price. But he, and it really wasn't coming from him. He understood, and he totally believed in what I was saying. And he called me and he said 4 to 5. And I said, she really should be about 2 to 5. And he said, no problem. And so, I think that there was, and it's not always so much that they want the public to think it's a more competitive race. I think part of the problem too is that they don't want horsemen that are in there to think they have no chance. And so that's kind of the other angle, because the problem that the public then gets is that now there's 1 or 2 fewer horses. So
I never really thought about that angle. That's interesting. Credit to David Aragona, who I think in the Woodward made Life is Good 1 to 9, I believe, which is the lowest morning line. Is that, I think I'm accurate about that, right?
Yeah.
It's the lowest morning line I've ever seen. It's the lowest you can go. But I know this might sound stupid, but I know you understand this, Nick. It's not easy to make that horse 1 to 9.
No, it's not, because you got to figure out what price to make everybody else, right?
Yeah. And it gets back to our spreadsheet, of course, right? Figuring out the odds.
Right. David would have probably preferred knowing that Thomas Shelby was going to be scratched ahead of time so that he could, have a little bit more in his line. But yeah, I mean, and look, the people that entered the Woodward knew they were overmatched anyway. So it wasn't, they weren't going to find out via the morning line. But yeah, that does go on. But I will also tell you that has not happened to me at Keeneland whatsoever. So
no, I'm sure. And we've had Jim Goodman on the show. I know a bunch of people at Keeneland. They're our first class all the way. Just for the record, wasn't suggesting that, as you know, by any means.
No, I know for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I know David Aragon does not want Uriah St. Louis knocking on his door. Why is my horse 60-1 in the morning?
Well, Uriah would probably say that it's 60-1. He's a short price.
Yeah, Uriah doesn't mind that at all. He'll just go off and win by more lengths. My last question or topic, Nick, is about the Breeders' Cup, if we may. I mean, I'd be remiss not to ask you. First of all, good luck, sir, because that is going to be one hell of a job to create the morning lines. I have two main questions, and again, people in the chat, if you have questions, feel free to ask Nick, and Nick we'll get you off. I don't want to take too long, but we got to talk about it. Flight line. Jim Miller had him 6-5. We don't know the field, although it looks like to me a bit of a smaller field. Looks like about 8, but the top 5 are really good. Like Olympiad might be your 5th morning line choice. Looks like right now. Yeah. Just any guess as to what you're going to be making flight line in the Classic, if you had to tell the management right now what it would be.
So I, in anticipation of us talking about this, I kind of did it before we started with an eye on who it looks like the horses running in it are right now. And I have Flightline at 3-5. So
breaking news, everyone. We just broke the internet. The views are exploding right now. There it is, everyone. Flightline. No, it's not official. It's not official, everyone. Go ahead, Nick. Sorry, 3-5.
Yes, no. So I mean, I don't see how I can make him much more than that without it being. I mean, I'll tell you the truth, Howard. I think he's going to open 1-9.
Really?
Close to it. I do. I think the public is just going to be overwhelmingly on him. Maybe even 1-5. But I've got him at 3-5. I have Epicenter at 5-1. Life is Good at 6-1. Taba at 8-1. And Olympiad at 10-1. And that leaves Rich Strike if he goes at 15. And I've got 30 apiece on Happy Saver and Hot Rod Charlie. I'd like to make Hot Rod Charlie 20 rather than 30. Rich Strike is a horse that, despite being a little overmatched on paper, he is going to take money. He did win the Kentucky Derby, and I don't want to make him an overly big price. The problem that I have from a handicapping perspective, and now that we're talking about it a week and a half or so in advance, is I have a hard time figuring out how the public is going to handle Life is Good, because on paper, he has no chance to me. Right. I just don't see how anybody could bet. And I only say that, and this is with all due respect to Life is Good, who I think is terrific. But you really think if Flightline gets beaten, he's going to get wired? I can't envision that scenario. I mean, to me, if Flightline gets beaten, it is so barring a situation where we're dealing with a post position extreme, like Flightline draws the 1, Life is Good draws the 2, and suddenly Flightline is the hunted and Life is Good is the hunter, then, other than that scenario, it looks to me pretty clearly on paper like Life is Good is going to go, and he is going to try and do his thing, which is to go as quick as he can and make Flightline chase him. And if that happens, to me, the only way Flightline loses is if somebody comes and runs by them. I don't see Life is Good burying him on the front end. So, and that's why I think Epicenter is going to become a very sexy horse in this race. He got 112 buyer last time out. For the most part, everybody in the field validated it in their next start. And he's going to come in for a barn that very likely could be winning its 2nd or 3rd Breeders' Cup race with him. Obviously, having Jackie's Warrior is a pretty solid favorite, and a slew of others that are contenders. And I think the same thing is going to be true of Taba. I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about, Baffert Revenge, and here's a progressive type of horse that's really run 2 really solid races now as a late season 3-year-old. Olympiad is probably the horse that gets lost in the shuffle a little bit, but I mean, I can't make him less than the 5th choice.
No, and just for everyone, just to going back to our exercise, if Nick puts it 3-5, everyone, again, you take a 3-5, which is 0.6. You add 1, that's 1.6. You do 100 divided by the 1.6, and you get 62.5%. So by that logic, all you listening and watching, that would mean if Lifeline's 3-5, in theory, he would have a 62.5% chance to win. And Nick, just saying that out loud, I think most people believe he's got a much better chance than that. So it's going to be fascinating to see what he's going to be. And also, you are, I believe I'm going to be sitting next to you during the BCBC, I believe. Is that right? Is that right, Nick? Also?
Yes, that's the plan.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm really excited, my friend.
You can make fun of my morning lines right to my face.
Wow, that'll be great. I can't wait for that. No, listen, I'm sure you'll find many ways to make fun of me because I'm easy to make fun of.
Not at all.
But Nick, just publicly, I'm really excited about having you at our wonderful table with some other very well-known people. I'll just put it that way in the handicapping world. So my last question, Nick, Euros. Appleby just came out. Nick Luck, by the way, has been doing a great job on Twitter, setting who the Appleby horses are coming over. It's becoming more solidified as to who's coming over and who's not. I'm assuming you have to do the same thing that we all do, which is watch a lot of tape, figure out what you're going to do, because with the influx of Euros, that makes the morning line more difficult.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to do pretty much race by race. I'm going to make individual kind of profile pages for each Euro and watch replays and take notes. And I think Appleby is probably the new O'Brien in terms of who's going to get serious money just simply because of the name. I think when you win 3 Breeders' Cup races like he did last year and win virtually every other race you enter a horse in North America, you certainly earn that moniker. And with what he did with Nation's Pride this year, obviously will go a long way towards contributing as well. I was interested to see Nation's Pride is running in the Breeders' Cup Turf after all, when he was originally not mentioned as a probable. So yeah, I think it's going to be a little tougher with some of the obscure ones. Some of the 3rd, 4th tier horses that are going to be in the mile, and the juvenile turf sprint. I know will be difficult because the Platinum Queen obviously comes in off a huge win in the Prix de la Bay at Longchamp.
Or like a creative force in the sprint,
Right. And Highfield Princess obviously being in there is going to get a lot of support. And then you wonder how these horses are going to compete against Golden Pal on his turf. So, if they're basing it on Golden Pal's run at Ascot, I don't think that's a fair representation of who he is either. So it's going to be a challenge. I mean, look, I'm not going to be disappointed if I end up a little bit off on a couple of them. There's going to be some that go off shorter than I anticipate. That's life.
Nick, I personally won't care about that because, listen, we're going to be deep diving into the BCBC. Last thing I'll say, I'm very fascinated to see what you're going to do with like Rebels Romance versus a Warlike Goddess, because these are not the best Euros that are coming over. I mean, people can say they're Euros, they're going to be better than ours. I mean, yes, but you got horses coming off of 3 weeks from British Champions Day, which some people might view as a negative. These are not the top Euros at all. I mean, so it's going to be the turf distance races to me. Juveniles the juveniles, I think the Euros are going to be pretty tough to beat in my opinion. But some of the older races, like you said, the mile, I mean, Modern Games, I think people have tempered a bit on him because of his loss. I'm not sure I have, but I'm curious to see what you do. Everyone's going to say, well, why doesn't Nick just put the top 3 Euros, just 1, 2, 3 in the betting market? That's being a bit short-sighted, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to stay away from the whole idea of, well, we'll just make the Euros the favorites. The Euros are just going to dominate. And I do think, obviously, they'll hold a very strong hand in all of the distance turf races, as is normally the case. But, I don't know necessarily if we're going to get swept. I guess we did last year in the filly and mare turf and mile. And juvenile turf. So it can get a little rough at times, but again, a race like the turf is going to be difficult because Warlike Goddess is not only very good, she's also very popular. She's a horse that's gotten bet very, very heavily. Now, granted, some of those were against her own gender, where she is kind of a little bit more of a standout. But I mean, last time against males in the Joe Hirsch, I know those horses are not. I'm on record as not being totally high on a lot of those horses, but I mean, she got pounded at the windows. There was never a moment where she was shocked, anything but a huge favorite. I was too. I was surprised by just how much money she took. I thought she'd win, but I really thought she'd win in like the 7-8 to 5 kind of range, and she quickly got under even money. So I was a little surprised by that.
She's getting that kind of like Tuppen kind of love, just that kind of fan base is starting to gravitate to her. It's I guess she's the Zenyatta, she's a female, she's a closer, blah blah blah. She's a wonderful horse, and I have nothing against her. Although I will not be betting her in the BCBC. I can tell you that right now, unless she's 15-1 post time or something. So
and the funny thing about her too is that I agree. I don't underestimate that her popularity likely increased based on the trouble in the Flower Bowl, because everybody was talking about her, and everybody wants to be clever and bet back a trip horse.
Right. Well, you say trouble, I say jockey riding,
Incompetence.
but that's a whole other.
Yeah. I
That's
mean,
a whole story.
I've extolled the virtues of Joel Rosario enough to comment when he makes a
Yes, you
mistake.
have.
It was a bad ride.
Yeah. Anyway, it was. He would say it. Nick, we really appreciate you coming on the show. I think people have learned a lot about morning lines. I think it's a fascinating topic. I hope everyone at home has learned a lot from Nick Tammaro and has a better understanding now of the odds and the math behind it. My friend, good luck with the rest of the meet at Keeneland. I look forward to seeing you at Keeneland. I know that BCBC, we're going to have a fun time no matter what happens financially, and I really appreciate you coming on tonight. Good luck to the Astros. And we'll see you in a few weeks, sir.
Thanks so much, my friend. Can't wait. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everyone. This has been Howard Kravitz, Nick Tammaro, episode 194 of the HHH Racing Podcast. Tune in tomorrow night. We're going 9:30 Eastern, a little bit later. I've got parent-teacher conferences, Nick. I can't do my regular show time. 9:30 Eastern with the wonderful Jessica Paquette. Take care, everyone. Have a great night. Bye-bye.